From Martina so far in this first set. First serve really hasn't worked up to its usual high standard. It cost her that other serve.
Sobrang di ko pa mapaniwala. Maraming salamat sa suporta. Sana patuloy yung suporta niyo sa akin.
I think for United players, especially the juniors, I think it's a great opportunity to be exposed to this level. And this
best moment, I think, was the happiest I've ever been was winning first Wimbledon.
Navratilova explodes as Ella's Australian Open nightmare sparks a racism scandal and a 24-hour ultimatum. Welcome back to Court Eva Tennis, the only place where we don't just cover tennis, we uncover the chaos, controversy, and carnage the mainstream media won't touch. If you're new here, strap in, because this is one of the most explosive stories to hit the tennis world in years, and if you're a returning champion, you already know we bring the heat. Today, we're diving headfirst into an Australian Open disaster that has fans outraged, legends furious, and one young superstar caught in the crossfire of what many are calling blatant disrespect. The name on everyone's lips is Alex Ela, and the question flooding social media is simple. Why the racism? Martina Navratilova, the 18-time Grand Slam champion known for calling out injustice, has reportedly unleashed a verbal assault on tournament organizers, accusing them of sidelining the Filipino sensation onto what amounted to a glorified practice court, leaving thousands of fans in chaos, triggering security nightmares, and raising uncomfortable questions about how the sport treats rising stars from underrepresented nations. And just as Melbourne reels from the fallout, Ela has already moved on, returning to Manila like a warrior fresh from battle, with unfinished business waiting for her back home. The Women's Open is about to become ground zero for redemption, and standing in Alex Ela's way in the first round is a Russian rival who demolished her 6 years ago. This is no longer just a tennis match, it's personal, a battle of pride and proof that the player they tried to bury in Melbourne is actually a force of nature that can't be contained. So grab your coffee, silence your phone, and settle in, because this story runs deep, touching on courtside chaos, international incidents, celebrity confrontations, and a homecoming that could define an entire career. This is the story of Alex Ela's Australian Open nightmare and her Manila resurrection. The disaster didn't begin with a loss or an injury, but with a scheduling decision so baffling it ignited international controversy. Ela, the 20-year-old phenomenon who has captured millions of fans across Southeast Asia and beyond, arrived at the Australian Open ranked 49th in the world, hardly an unknown qualifier scraping by in early rounds. She entered as a legitimate top 50 player with junior Grand Slam pedigree, a WTA title, and a social media following that rivals top 10 stars. Yet when it came time for her main draw debut, organizers bypassed Rod Laver Arena, where the biggest names shine under the lights, skipped Margaret Court Arena, the traditional stage for rising talents, and instead placed her on Show Court 3, a decision that would soon fuel outrage and controversy. Oh no, and absolutely not. Instead of giving her a court worthy of the moment, organizers placed Alex Ela on Court 6. For anyone unfamiliar with Melbourne Park, Court 6 is what insiders politely call a back court, and what everyone else would describe as a shoebox. It holds only a few hundred people at best, packs fans in like sardines, has no giant screens, and offers minimal infrastructure, the kind of court reserved for first-round matches between players ranked outside the top 200, not a global star with a fiercely loyal fan base. The backlash was immediate, as Filipino tennis communities across social media erupted in disbelief at what felt like an obvious and avoidable miscalculation. Still, organizers refused to budge, and the match went ahead as scheduled. What followed was entirely predictable to anyone paying attention to Ela's meteoric rise, though it seemed to completely blindside the Australian Open's planning committee. Hours before the match, fans began arriving, not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands, a massive wave of Filipino supporters, many traveling from across Australia and others flying in directly from the Philippines, all determined to watch their hero compete on the Grand Slam stage. They arrived waving flags the size of bed sheets, armed with drums, chants, and faces painted in the red, white, blue, and yellow of the Philippine flag, ready to turn a tennis match into a full-blown festival of national pride, but there was nowhere to put them. Outside Court 6, the scene quickly spiraled into chaos as the limited capacity was reached within minutes of the gates opening. Security personnel were overwhelmed while thousands of fans pressed against barriers, desperate for even a glimpse of the court. Lines stretched for what witnesses described as hundreds of meters, snaking through Melbourne Park like a restless dragon as people were crushed together in the heat, tempers flared, and chants of "We want Alex" echoed across the grounds, audible even to players warming up on nearby practice courts. Tournament officials were forced to call in additional security, with police put on standby as what began as a scheduling misstep escalated into a genuine safety concern, all because someone in the tournament office had catastrophically underestimated Alex Ila's drawing power, or so it seemed. That question sparked a darker turn as social media erupted with disbelief. Why would a player with millions of followers, arguably the biggest active sports star in a nation of 115 million people, be assigned to a court that couldn't accommodate even a fraction of her supporters? Fans began comparing schedules, noticing lower-ranked players with smaller followings and fewer storylines placed on show courts, fueling accusations of blatant disrespect. The conversation grew heated, the word disrespect began trending, and soon an accusation no one in tennis wants to hear surfaced was this racism, yet another example of how the sport treats stars from underrepresented nations. Was this yet another case of the tennis establishment treating players from non-traditional tennis nations as second-class citizens, regardless of ranking or popularity? These weren't fringe voices or online trolls stirring outrage, but long-time tennis fans, Filipino community leaders, and respected sports journalists raising serious questions about systemic bias and how tournaments distribute their most valuable resources, court time and visibility. The Australian Open suddenly found itself in a full-blown public relations crisis, and it was about to intensify. Enter Martina Navratilova, a figure synonymous with equality and fairness in sport. The Czech-American legend, who defected from communist Czechoslovakia to pursue freedom and tennis greatness, fought for equal prize money for women, and has long been a fearless advocate for LGBTQ rights and social justice, reportedly saw the situation in Melbourne and decided she had had enough. According to multiple reports circulating across tennis media and social platforms, Navratilova did not mince words, allegedly confronting the issue head-on by asking the question few with her stature dared to say publicly: why the racism? Those 3 words, attributed to one of the most respected voices in tennis history, instantly transformed a controversy into a crisis. To be clear, Navratilova is not a reactionary provocateur, she is a Hall of Famer whose voice carries enormous weight, and when she uses a term as serious as racism, it is deliberate. Her reported criticism focused on key failures, beginning with the refusal to recognize Alex Ila as the global phenomenon she has become. This wasn't just about rankings, but about understanding the modern tennis landscape, where influence and drawing power often transcend standings. Ila boasts over 1 million Instagram followers, features in international advertising campaigns, and is a household name across Asia, ignoring that reality isn't just bad business, it's willful blindness. Second, Navratilova allegedly highlighted a glaring double standard, suggesting that if Ila were British, American, or Australian, even with half her ranking and momentum, she would never have been relegated to a back court. The implication was clear and deeply uncomfortable. Players with only a fraction of Alex Ila's following would have been granted prime placement if they came from traditional tennis powerhouses. The tennis establishment, critics argued, still operates with unconscious or perhaps even conscious biases about who deserves the spotlight and who can be quietly pushed to the margins. Navratilova's reported criticism also emphasized the safety failures, pointing out that by denying thousands of fans access and forcing them into dangerously crowded conditions, the tournament had failed in its most basic duty of care. This wasn't merely embarrassing, it was reckless and entirely avoidable had organizers acknowledged reality and planned accordingly. Reaction to Navratilova's comments was swift and sharply divided. Progressive fans and much of the tennis media applauded her for voicing long-suppressed concerns, arguing that the sport has a long history of sidelining players from emerging markets and that this incident was simply the most visible example yet. Defenders of the tournament and more traditional voices pushed back, framing the situation as a simple scheduling error rather than evidence of systemic discrimination. But by then, the damage was done. The story had burst beyond tennis forums and Filipino community pages into the global spotlight. Major sports outlets picked it up, Australian Open racism scandal began trending worldwide, and organizers, silent through the early backlash, suddenly found themselves facing a 24-hour ultimatum from Filipino fan groups. Community organizations, Filipino fan groups, and sports advocacy networks reportedly united to issue a coordinated demand for accountability. They wanted answers, a formal explanation for the scheduling decision, and a public apology for the chaos and perceived disrespect, and they wanted it within 24 hours. Failing that, they vowed to escalate the issue to the International Tennis Federation, calling for a formal investigation into potential bias in court allocations and scheduling practices. At that point, this was no longer about a single match or one player. It had become a referendum on how tennis treats diversity, how it values emerging markets, and whether it truly lives up to its claim of being a global sport. One of the world's foremost prestigious tournaments was suddenly facing a crisis of legitimacy, And the clock was ticking, but here's the thing about all of this. Amid all the controversy and chaos, there was still a tennis match that had to be played. Alex Ila, caught in the eye of an international storm, was forced to step onto the cramped, overcrowded confines of Court 6 and compete at the highest level of the sport. The pressure on her young shoulders was immense. Not only was she making her Australian Open main draw debut, but she was doing so under the weight of an entire nation's expectations, with a logistical nightmare unfolding around her as part of a growing international incident she never asked to be part of. Standing across the net was Alicia Parks of the United States, a powerful 23-year-old known for her massive serve and aggressive baseline game. Ranked 97th in the world, Parks represented the archetypal dangerous floater, turning the matchup into a classic clash between a rising star and an unpredictable threat, one that looked evenly balanced on paper. Inside the fevered confines of Court 6, the match transformed into something entirely different. When Alex Ila walked onto the court, the noise was deafening, every seat filled, every standing spot packed, and the fans who made it inside determined to roar loudly enough for the thousands left outside. It felt less like a tennis match and more like a football derby or a prize fight, an electric and intimidating atmosphere utterly unheard of for a first-round Grand Slam. For the opening 30 minutes, Ila rode that wave of energy flawlessly, playing fearless, high-octane tennis with crisp movement, clean ball striking, and surgical shot placement. Alicia Parks, despite her power and pedigree, looked overwhelmed by both the opponent across the net and the raucous crowd surrounding them. Ila broke serve early and never looked back, painting lines, ripping winners from impossible angles, and thrilling Filipino fans who celebrated every point as if it were a Grand Slam title. The chants never stopped, the energy never dipped, and when Ila closed out the opening set 6-0, handing a bagel to a top 100 opponent in her Grand Slam main draw debut, it felt like destiny unfolding. It was the kind of moment meant to silence critics, justify the hype, and announce her arrival on the sport's biggest stage. But tennis rarely follows a perfect script. As the second set began, the momentum shifted. Parks, to her credit, adjusted, serving bigger, taking the ball earlier, and imposing her game with renewed determination, no longer rattled by the partisan crowd. Slowly and inexorably, the balance began to tilt, and the atmosphere that had fueled Ila in the first set became a double-edged sword. Desperate to help their hero, sections of the crowd crossed tennis's unwritten lines, cheering Parks' errors, missed serves, long balls, and double faults, actions born of passion that would soon complicate an already volatile situation. Tennis tradition rarely sees such violations at professional matches. Spectators are expected to applaud good play and remain silent during points and between serves, never cheering for an opponent's mistakes, and certainly never for double faults. Yet that's exactly what happened to Alicia Parks, and it had an immediate impact. The American later told reporters that the crowd's behavior was challenging, but she ultimately used it as fuel. She got angry, laser-focused, and stopped worrying about winning over fans. Her sole concern became winning the match. Her dormant power game suddenly erupted. Serves became unreturnable, forehands dictated rallies, and she pushed Ila behind the baseline, forcing errors. Meanwhile, the young Filipino star, who had been confident and aggressive in the first set, found herself scrambling, defending, and trying to weather a storm that only intensified. Parks captured the second set 6-3, turning what had looked like a coronation into a grueling dogfight, and setting the stage for an even more brutal third set. Alex Ila fought with everything she had, saving break points, chasing down impossible balls, and showing tremendous heart and resilience, but the power gap became impossible to overcome. Alicia Parks was hitting harder, flatter, and more consistently, breaking Ila's serve midway through the third set and closing out the match 6-2, completing an improbable comeback from a set-and-love deficit. The dream of a triumphant Australian Open main draw debut ended on Court 6, the very court that had sparked international controversy, with a final score of 6-0, 3-6, 2-6, a line that captured the dominance, the collapse, and the defeat but barely hinted at what Ila had endured. She didn't just lose a match, she survived a circus, competing under conditions no first-round player should face, with organizational chaos swirling around her, thousands of fans packed into a backcourt, and a global controversy bearing down on her young shoulders. Yet she handled it with grace, refusing to complain about the conditions or blame the crowd, instead calling the support heartwarming despite the loss, meeting reporters with poise, signing autographs in the scorching Australian sun, posing for photos, hugging crying children, and thanking fans for their unwavering loyalty, displaying more class and maturity in defeat than the tournament organizers had in their planning. While the Australian Open scrambled to manage the PR disaster, Ila was already moving forward, embodying the mindset of a champion who reloads, refocuses, and returns stronger. Within days, she was back in Manila, not as a defeated athlete but as a conquering hero preparing for her next battle. The Philippine Women's Open, a historic WTA 125 event at the Rizal Memorial Tennis Center, marking the first tournament of this magnitude ever held in the Philippines. Here, Ila was not just participating, he was the event itself, selling out tickets, drawing international media attention, inspiring young Filipinos to pick up rackets, and positioned second in the draw for a potential deep run and home soil title. But the tennis gods, true to form, added one more twist. When the draw was revealed, Ila's first-round opponent was none other than a Russian rival who had defeated her 6 years ago, instantly transforming the tournament from a story of redemption into one of revenge.
Kamusta mga kapong Pinoy? Surprise! Excited na akong imbitahin kayong lahat na manood sa mga laban ko sa Mubadala Abu